Continuing You Can Change the World, The Christopher Approach by James Keller. Chapter 5, Government. Your job to make it good. We must not be confused about the issue which confronts the world today. That issue is as old as recorded history. It is tyranny versus freedom. Tyranny has, throughout history, assumed many disguises and has relied on many false philosophies to justify its attack on human freedom. Communism masquerades as a doctrine of progress. It is nothing of the kind. It is, on the contrary, a movement of reaction. It denies that man is a master of his fate, and consequently denies man's right to govern himself. Not entirely true with either that, but and even worse, communism denies the very existence of God. Well, communism, capitalism, neither of them are exactly the same as theism, are they? Religion is persecuted because it stands for freedom under God. This threat to our liberty and our faith must be faced by each one of us, said Harry S. Truman. And, well, a lot of what people have called religion has tried to take a lot of these same freedoms, right? In a visitor's gallery at one of the United Nations sessions at Lake Success some months ago, one of the spectators, a graying, middle-aged New York housewife, found her attention more taken, strangely enough, by the conduct of those in the seats around her than by what was happening on the meeting floor. The delegates from such nations as England, France, the Netherlands, Brazil, and India had already made their appearance, along with quite a few others, and the gallery had shown not the slightest bit of interest in any of them. They sat back in silence, yet there was an air of expectation among them that was so electric it could actually be felt. Even the appearance of the United States delegate, Warren Austin, failed to stir them. To this housewife, the mother of a large family, and a Christopher, by the way, it was all very puzzling. This isn't the American spirit, she told herself. Common courtesy, ordinary politeness, seemed to call for some show of interest, perhaps even a bit of applause. Yet none was forthcoming until most of the delegates had taken their seats. Then suddenly, as one man, the gallery, almost all 750 of them, were on their feet and applauding wildly as the Soviet delegate, Mr. Gromyko, and his aides entered the hall. The outburst lasted until they had moved to their places and sat down, while the meeting proceeded with the business at hand, and one delegate after another from the various nations present addressed the gathering. The gallery lapsed back into stony silence. When the session neared its close, and Gromyko had failed to express himself on any of the issues discussed, the air of disappointment among the spectators was obvious. Soon afterwards, the meeting broke up for the day. On her way home, the housewife found herself reaching two conclusions, neither of which she was as yet prepared to admit to anyone else in public. She'd heard reports about the conduct of the gallery at the UN meetings. In fact, that was the main reason she made it her business to attend, and neither the spectators on this particular day were unusually demonstrative in showing their pro-Soviet sympathies and apathetic toward their own government's policies. She herself was extraordinarily sensitive and critical. She decided to make another trip out to Lake Success, the first chance she got. Now, politically, we should really, it's not that we can't look after the world or the group or something like this, but we need to look at the individual interests and not just tramp that out. It's like, how can you really be interested in the world if you're not really regarding yourself? And how can you be trusted with the point of view on the world if, you haven't looked around you, Or to yourself or whatever. I'll articulate that better elsewhere. Several weeks later, she found the procedure almost a carbon copy of the earlier meeting, but she didn't want to jump to any wrong conclusions. Instead, she made a mental note to mark it down as a mere coincidence, pending further investigation. On the third trip, however, when the same thing happened, the inference was too plain to be any longer ignored. On this particular occasion, Mr. Gromyko finally gave voice to the communist viewpoint. On an important matter before the meeting, with biting sarcasm, he went on record with the statement that the United States and those nations which agreed with our position were pursuing imperialistic policies and were roadblocks in the path to peace. And, you know, this part of why the Soviet Union did so much is because people are like, well, if you're being imperialistic in your way, why can't we? The Soviet Union, with its own people enslaved, with the largest standing army in the world, and with an unparalleled record of aggression, he labeled the great hope for peace for all mankind. An ovation from the gallery greeted his public pronouncement of the Red Party line. After stating the official Soviet veto on the question before the assembly, Gromyko walked out before the session had concluded its business, and with him went practically all of the gallery. About 40 or 50 people remained to hear what the other delegates had to say. When the meeting finally broke up, this housewife decided on a little experiment. As the delegates started to file out of the hall, she stood up and applauded. In a moment, several of the remaining spectators joined her, and the applause grew until almost all the deserted gallery were on their feet, clapping for all they were worth. Several of the diplomats looked up in pleased surprise at this show of appreciation and encouragement for what they were trying to do, and one turned around to smile up at the gallery before he left the hall. Discussing the affair afterwards with her husband, the housewife made this enlightening observation. You know, that's exactly what's wrong with government. What happened out at the UN, people, it doesn't matter where they live, don't care enough about how they're governed. So, what can you do about it? Her husband asked, and knowing what goes on, came back the reply. What I did out there at Lake Success wasn't much, but it could grow into something big if enough of us sat up and took notice. After all, how are the people down in Washington or even in our own borough going to know how the average American feels if we don't take the trouble to tell them? In the months since this incident, the whole tenor of the spectators in the gallery at the UN has changed for the better. More and more good Americans have taken the time to interest themselves in this vital phase of the government's activities, influenced in no small measure by the actions of this energetic Christopher and other men and women like her who count public service above personal pleasure or convenience. Wherever this incident has been told, an unmistakable shudder of self-reproach shows itself in the faces of those who hear it. Deep down inside themselves, people know that most of their country's troubles, as well as the world's, lie at their doorstep because of their failure to participate in bringing sound Christian values into the councils and governments of men. Well, whatever real